Ahmed's research interests are in labor, migration, and development economics. And today he's going to present his work in progress on the women empowering effect of higher education. So please welcome Ahmed, and you can start this.
Thank you so much, Dina, and thank you for the invitation. And thanks all for being here today. So this is joint work with Alina Shishkova. Alina is currently is a PhD student at Maastricht University, and before that she was a research assistant at IZA. And in this paper, we study the impact of the higher education public policy in Egypt in the 1960s and 70s after independence, where the government was interested in building universities and constructing universities in each province or governorate, right? So we study the impact of this policy on labor market outcomes. First on education, like the percentage or the share of people who receive higher education. Also on labor market outcomes and marriage outcomes for women. The perspective here is like everything else that happens in the region, just the region perspective. So once you have like gender neutral policy, you find an impact which is super positive for women more than I'm going to explain why in a couple of minutes. Why this topic is important? Well, we all know that there are gender inequalities in education across developing countries, right? Despite the fact that this has been decreasing over time, it still exists. And it's very much correlated with economic development. So this figure here is much the correlation between economic development measured by GDP per capita and gender disparity measured by higher education inequality between the two genders. And as you see, there's a negative correlation. You can replace this with any other measure of inequality in education, and it gives pretty much the same picture. So this tells you that inequality goes hand in hand with economic disadvantage for countries, right? Why this is the case? Maybe two main reasons. First, expected returns are different across the two genders. So usually families would think, like, if you want to maximize your benefit as an economist, you would spend more on your son, not your daughter, because the belief or the expected belief is like, my son is going to support me at old age, my daughter is leaving the household. That's why I'm investing a lot of resources for education of my son, but not my daughter. The second thing is higher costs for girls. And the cost is not only monetary cost, but also costs in terms of social cost or stigma, especially if you do not have a school or education institution in the vicinity, right? So it's kind of like associated with the stigma of sending your daughter away. This explains why a lot of education policies, even the gender neutral ones, benefit girls more than boys, right? And this has been the case across several developing countries and has been documented in the literature before. However, there is not much evidence or returns to higher education, especially in developing countries. Go ahead, please.
Why does the returns to higher education bigger for girls?
Expected returns is lower for girls, not higher. So the point is the following. Usually families, especially in disadvantaged families in developing countries, would think about education as an investment, right?
I mean, the benefits of higher education to girls are higher than boys?
Lower for girls. So the expected returns is lower for girls, higher for boys. These not the actual returns, but expected returns.
Education policies.
Sorry.
Girls more.
Exactly. So let me explain this one more time. This is actually because of that. So what happens is the following. Whenever you have a gender neutral policy, say for example, a developing country would spend in constructing schools, right? Who of the two genders you would expect to benefit more? I would say girls, mainly because they start with a lower amount of education to start with, right? That's why whenever you have a school built, girls would benefit much more than boys. This is exactly what I mean by this, right? In addition, men is particularly interesting context, mainly because of, despite the fact that there has been high education rates among girls and enrollment rates at schools and universities is increasing dramatically, but labor force participation is not matching this, right? So the region is one of the lowest regions in terms of like share of women participating in the labor market, right? So this creates kind of a paradox, if you will. That's why it's important. What we do exactly in this paper, we investigate the impact of access to higher education on education outcomes, labor market, and marriage outcomes. The identification strategy comes from the expansion of higher education through constructing public universities in Egypt over the time frame of 1960s, 1970s. Over this time period, 16 universities have been constructed in the country. The idea is, by constructing these universities, you reduce the cost of attaining higher education for the two genders alike, but girls benefit much more, exactly what I have explained, because they were previously constrained from moving around because of social norms. So actually, I would have sent my son to Cairo or Alexandria, for example, to get education, but not my daughter because of social norms against women leaving the household and traveling alone. So what we do here is we combine data on the time of university opening with a province, within a governorate, together with individual data on labor market outcomes for the two genders, coming from labor force surveys, and marriage and social empowerment of women coming from Egyptian labor market panel survey. What we find in the paper is positive effect of higher education on getting a university degree, right? So the probability increased by 1.7 percentage points, or around 11%. And most of that is coming mainly, actually, almost all of the impact is coming from women. So an increase of 4 percentage points, which is an increase of 37%, like from 11% to 15%.
And how do you measure social empowerment?
Very good question. So I'm going to explain this in a couple of slides, but we have several measures. So we have some measures on marriage, equality, but we have also measures on intra-household decision making, who's making the decision within the household. We have a lot of questions asking people, for example, about who's making the decision in each of the following situations, like purchasing large thing in the household, for example. So there I make kind of like an index measuring how much power the woman has using these indices, right? So I'll come to this in detail if I explain the social empowerment. These findings that I'm going to show you are robust to migration and battery of differentials. If you have any questions up to this point, please feel free to ask. Now then I move forward with data, what we do exactly with how exactly we get this data. So remember, we have two sides here. We have the university side, right? And we have the individual side. So for the university side, we use three sources of data to get the date of construction. So luckily, here in Egypt, each university constructed comes together with a presidential decree, right? So the president has to accept this, and this comes with a decree, right? So at the beginning, actually, we thought, this is more than enough. We can go ahead with this and use it. But then we figured that it's not always as easy as it is, because usually universities start as like a branch of a bigger university in another governorate, right? And then later on, they make it a big university out of this branch, right? And the presidential decree would come only with the date of constructing the actual, or giving it the name and the status of like full university. So what we do is we visit the official website of each department across the universities in Egypt, and there they have like a history section telling you exactly when each department was constructed, right? So we cross-check against each other, like these two things. The third is a data set that we purchased from the IAU, or International Association of Universities. And this is kind of a data set, a global data set, that tells you exactly each department and each university across the globe when exactly it was constructed. So this is the university side. Then for the individual side, we have labor force surveys from 2007 to 2016. We excluded the years 2010, 2011 because of economic instability. And we had a total of about 107,000 observations. The majority are men. The data set contains a lot of information on education attainment and labor market outcomes. The other data set is the Egyptian Labor Market Panel Survey, and this one is much richer when it comes to a lot of social aspects and asking people a lot of questions about empowerment, for example, or marriage and these kind of things. So we focus there on women, and we have a total of 2,480 women. Okay? We limit our sample to individuals born between 43 and 64, and for whom university in their governorate opened between the years 67 and 77. Why we focus on this? just to exclude any other education policy that took place in the country before. So before that, before this time frame, there has been some change in the years of education, compulsory years of education, increased from 6 to 9. And after this, there has been also some other changes, including, for example, reduction of compulsory schooling from 9 years to 8 years, and some other stuff. So this group is pretty much, hopefully, immune from any other education policy that took place in the country. We also excluded the war-affected governorates, the Suez Canal governorates, Suez, Ismailia, and Port Said, because a lot of migration took place and there was like war back then. So this gives us a total of 16 universities, as I mentioned before. So this map shows you the rollout of universities across the country. Of course, we exclude the big governorates that witnessed universities before the 1960s, like Cairo, Alexandria, and I think Asyut, but actually it's not here. This needs a little bit of more work. Some universities or like some provinces didn't witness any construction of any university of whatever kind, but you had like gradual like construction and implementation of this policy across different governments. The empirical strategy we use is staggered different which is like very straightforward regression. We regress the outcome of interest, which is education, and labor market outcomes, and marriage outcomes. For one particular individual in province R, in cohort K, on a dummy variable indicating if you belong to the exposed group or not, right? And the exposed group is defined by being at the age frame, the age limit between 12 and 18 years old, right? Then you are 1, you are treated because you are young enough to enroll at the university, and 0 otherwise. 0 if you are between 19 and 25, right? We control also for the governed rate and cohort fixed effects. And also for some specifications, we interact those together to control for any governed rate specific time trend. Say, for example, if you have a governed rate that was like, education became for some reason more popular or so, we can capture this by just interacting those two together, right? So this is pretty much like the basic specification. June?
And so the definition of getting access to higher education is what is the need. There is at least one university or the number of universities, like how do we
No, it's not the number. It's exactly like the first one. It's pretty much like your age, like where exactly you are in terms of age and cohort when the university is constructed. So if you are young enough, you are treated. If you are not, then you are not treated, right?
And all the universities are public.
Exactly. So we do this only for public universities. And also, I forgot to mention, the time frame we're talking about was only public universities in Egypt. So the first private university in Egypt was constructed in 1996. So we exclude this, right?
Sorry, Ahmed, I have a question.
Sure, Jamal, go ahead.
Sorry. So how are we here? I think there is one university before 1969. It's called AUC. It's a private. It's came before. So 1919. So I hear a question about the estimation. How are we going to control for the other factors at the governorate level that may be affecting the individual outcomes here, like factories opening in the governorate, industrial policy, industrial zone, something else?
Very good point. Unfortunately, the labor force survey doesn't have that many covariates to control for. So we don't do this. And we hope that by just like capturing the governed rate fixed effects and the dummy fixed effects, we are taking care of this. But I agree with you, there could be some other covariates taking place. We haven't done much in this, but what we can do is to play around with the covariates using the ELM-based data. We haven't done this because just like, for comparability reasons, but we can play around with that. Sure. And regarding the AUC, also like Cairo University was constructed like a long time ago. We exclude those. Cairo is completely from this exercise.
Try to include any government level variables to control for what
Yeah, exactly. So the governed rate fixed effect.
not only the fixed effect, like for example, education rates, gender.
No, but it will be at the government rate level, so it's pretty much covered by this, captured by this. Exactly, that's why we don't do it. But yeah, but maybe with the ELMPS, we can control for, no, we can control for more variables at the individual level, like the background of the family, for example, their education, this kind of stuff. We can do this using the ELMPS.
I'm trying to think of something that is captured like cultural norms. Like the districts, for example. You have some district level variables in the ELMPS.
ELMPS, we have this only for 4 waves. I can do this actually across 4 waves. I can show you actually what we have done when it comes to robustness checks, but yeah. But then this is not the level of treatment, because the level of treatment here is the whole government rate, right? So I construct the university in the government rate. So it could be the case that some districts which are closer to the place of the construction are affected much more. And I can show you this. This happens actually.
This is another thing I want to ask you. You're not controlling for the distance, right? Between distance to the university.
No, I do this separately as a robustness check, and I can show it to you.
You have the distance?
Exactly. We have the distances, and most of the impact is coming from the very close neighborhoods.
How do you get that? The ELMPS doesn't control doesn't have the coordinates.
No, we have the district. So what I do is like, the center of your district compared to the exact place of the university, right? This is what I do. Any other questions? Okay, so for this to be correct, we have some assumptions to make. First, we assume that there's no selection into treatment, right? Because if treated and untreated are different on either observable or unobservable characteristics, then what any effect we can find here could be pretty much because of these differences and not because of the construction of the university, right? This is important. But as I said, this is pretty much like a government rate level intervention, right? So it's beyond individual control. You cannot control it as an individual. But what you can do, the only thing you can do is migrate, right? You can migrate or send your son or daughter away, right? Like for getting education. But doing a lot of work on migration and just like trying to see what happens, there's no impact whatsoever when it comes to migration. Even like what I just mentioned to Rania, most of the impact is coming within the government rate and even within the very close vicinity of the place, not the migration.
Because migration, it could be the parent himself who migrated, so the father, and he acquired some cultural norms from settling in urban areas, because during this period, there is a lot of internal migration happening to urban areas, maybe to greater Cairo. So the parent could have acquired more open-minded cultural norm that actually has been transmitted to the family. And so I'm actually waiting to the end to ask this question, but how can we dissociate the direct impact of these policies of opening up the universities with their impact on social empowerment? Because I think the time period could allow for other external factors that could play a role. How can we say that this is actually the direct impact of the education policy? So probably we can wait.
Sure. Exactly. Let me just show you the main analysis with the results and the figures and the robustness checks. And if this question remains unanswered, we can discuss it. Yeah. Okay, the second important thing is no pretrends within government rates in education prior to the construction of universities. And we take care of this by interacting universities and dummies for the years. But also I'm going to show you also event study right now, like not the staggered diff and diff, but rather within the same government rate, the different cohorts, how exactly they are affected by the policy. So this is the figure. Just to explain this, I'm sorry, it should be on the y-axis, the probability of getting university degree, right? So we read this as the probability of getting university degree for each cohort. And these cohorts are relevant cohorts to the time when the university was constructed. So this is the age when university opened, right? Here, this is the age of 18. So 18, 17, 16, till 12, like from 12 to 18. Those are the treated group because they are young enough to be treated, right? To get the education. And those are the older cohorts, right? So too old to be treated if the university is constructed, right? And as you see here, there's nothing happening. There's no trend, nothing at all prior to this point. But for the younger generations, it starts to kick in. This is pretty much the story. This is pretty much the paper, right? Most of the impact is coming from girls, right? Men here are treated. They are affected also, but not as much, right? So they benefit still, but not as women. So this is pretty much like the paper in one graph.
And does that have to do maybe with like availability for jobs, availability of jobs for men without necessarily having to have a higher education, versus maybe women believing that they need to have higher education to maybe access the labor force?
Great point. Yeah, exactly. But keep in mind, we are talking about Egypt in the 1960s and 70s, and those people are guaranteeing a job by just getting this education. So public employment, I'm going to show you in a second that most of the jobs are in public employment. And it's a very good point because public employment is very popular among women. So probably like, you can push your daughter to get education because you guarantee a future for her by just getting and guaranteeing a job, right? But I'm going to show you in a couple of seconds also in robustness checks that we do this same exercise for other countries because I was a bit worried about this. Like, is it because of Egypt and because of public employment? But I show you that in other countries, it's pretty much the same pattern as well. June?
Is there exams with the university or like selection?
True. So there's an exam called Thanawiyya Amma, like the higher secondary education finishing exam. This people have to pass this exam to enroll there. But here, this is intent to treat. So I'm actually taking into consideration everyone, regardless actually of they want to. But actually we do in the robustness checks, looking through the different, like where exactly the impact is kicking in, and it's kicking in for this particular group, those who are in secondary school and just going there. So it's a very good one. Any other questions? Okay, so now I'll move to, okay, perfect. So I'm going to move to the results, the education outcomes. So here we look at the impact of this policy on getting university degree, getting the diploma. This is for everyone, women and men separately, right? As you see, there's a positive impact. Like this specification here, this is the specification that I'm going to focus on. Specification 2, 4, and 6, because here I'm controlling for the cohort times province fixed. It's just to control for any province-specific time trend, right? As you see here, there's an increase of 1.7 percentage points, which is equivalent to about 11%. Because before that, only 15% finished university degree, like got university degree, right? So this is quite substantial. But most of the impact is coming from women, 4 percentage points and an increase of 37%, right? Because they start already with a far lower level, 11% versus 16% for men. Once you control for these cohort and province fixed stuff, nothing, right? So it's not that positive, the impact. So the impact is mainly driven by women, right? And I don't have an explanation for this other than the social norms, right? I don't know what else could be explaining this, right? My son is going to be sent to Cairo if he's good enough to get education, my daughter no. So now you're creating opportunities for women by constructing such university, right? Okay, now we follow those people and check their labor market outcomes, right? Again, for the two genders, women and men, we look here at the probability of work, if you are working or not. Public employment, because as I said, Egypt, 1960s, 70s. Formal employment, working hours, and low wages, the wage they get, right? What you find there is positive impact mainly for women, right? So women are benefiting much more in terms of the probability of work. Keep in mind that we're talking about Egypt and female labor force participation is really low. So here only 34% of women work, right? And you're increasing this by 4.3% percentage points. So it's an increase of about 13%, right? Which is like really.
So the treated is like women in this age group, right?
Exactly. Women who are exposed to higher education. Exactly. It's intent to treat. Exactly. So this is pretty much, if you will, it's kind of like being exposed to higher education, right? Yeah. And actually, building on Jules' point, if I limit this only to those who finish secondary education, or like, the impact is much stronger. But I just prefer to have this on the intent to treat kind of thing. Okay. Public employment increases significantly. This is conditional on work, of course. And as you see here, 85% of women work on the public employment. right? So almost everyone, right? And this even increases by almost 5 percentage points for my employment as well. Men are affected in terms of wages. So actually we have positive returns for higher education for men. They still, as I showed you in this graph, they still benefit slightly, right? And this translates into better wages. So actually there's a bit of effect for women, for men as well, right? But mainly comes in the form of higher returns to education. Not that high, but it's there.
Like the wages monetary value of wage increase, when you have when you are born in this specific age.
Exactly. When you're exposed to higher education, right, your wages increase because you are more likely to get more education. True. Okay, so I mean, if you want to read this differently, women are benefiting actually in terms of getting a work, joining the labor force, and also a bit of the quality of the job, right? Men are benefiting in terms of money, right? Sorry, say again. It's a question in the labor force survey. So we ask people. No. It's just today. So actually, I have this data from 2007, I think, to 2000. I forgot the time frame, but they ask people how much money you earn, and we transfer this into real value per hour, right? So it's like real wage. No, but these labor market outcomes come from today, from 2007 to 2016, right? You see what I mean? The treated or non-treated, something that happened in the past, but these are the outcomes that come from today, right? So given that women are benefiting on other margins than the labor market, like the social empowerment and this kind of stuff, we also look at the marriage outcomes for women, right? So here we use the two data sets actually, the labor force survey and the ELMPS. For the labor force survey, we use data on the probability of getting married. If the spouse is highly educated, measured by university degree, having a university degree, and measured by years of education. And for the ELMPS, we use age at marriage, when they got married, intra-household decision making. As I said, it's pretty much an index of different questions asking, if you want, who's in the household making this decision, purchasing a large thing, sending kids to the doctor, buying clothes for the kids, stuff like this. It's an index that has been used a lot in the development economics literature to measure actually the intra-household bargaining power, pretty much. We have also indicators on fertility, number of children at the age of 30 and 40, and age when you got your first kid, right? As you see here, marriage is not affected. So you get married no matter what, highly educated, low educated, women get married. But the quality of the marriage improves, right? So the husband is more educated if you are exposed to this higher degree. This is expected, right? It's a sortative mating kind of theory. So by about half a year of education increase. Age at marriage increases by almost 2 years for women, right? Which is also expected. Intra-household decision-making increases. So actually those women are more empowered socially, if you believe in these kind of indices. But fertility is not affected. We don't have any evidence on fertility being affected by this.
This is actually where I have the question. So we're seeing that education has improved the quality of marriage.
True.
And then we're looking at the social empowerment. So educated women are more empowered within the household.
True.
But this could be the result of this improvement in the quality of marriage. So they're already getting married to a husband who has completed a certain level of education. So he could be an open-minded husband, which increases her social empowerment within the household. So I'm not really sure how was this effect. How can we really say that this social empowerment is coming from this access to education and not any kind of indirect effects that could lead to this social empowerment as well? Especially at the time, so we're measuring the social empowerment now, so in 2007, And this access to education, given the age group, happened already years ago.
True.
So along the way, there could be effects on the parents before marriage that actually led to a better matching at marriage. So this is in itself improving their social environment. So I think other external variables need to be added to the model just to make sure that you're having this direct effect of access to education with its impact on social empowerment directly and not from the noise that is coming around it, whether parents or husband or quality of marriage.
Just to make sure that I understand. So the first part of what you said, I totally agree with. So I cannot disentangle those. So it could be the case that you are getting married to a better husband, like highly educated husband, right? Who's more progressive, who's like more. So this is totally accepted, and I agree with you. The parents' part, I got lost.
From the time that she finished education till the time she gets married, the quality of the parents themselves could ensure this high quality marriage for her. So the parent who is more inclined to educate their daughters up to university degree would have in mind that he wants her to marry someone who is good enough.
I see.
So the parents themselves could acquire.
What I can do, actually, I cannot do much actually using labor force survey because I don't have the family background. I cannot do much there. But it's a good point. What I can do using ELMPS is to look at, yeah, sure, this is a great point. I can do this and see actually where this is coming from.
You're not controlling for any parents' characteristics?
No, I don't have this in the labor force survey. As I showed you, what I'm controlling for is just like, the time dummy and the governed rate dummy, nothing more. But with ELMPS, we can do this. The only issue is like we have much fewer number of observations, but we can play around with it. Go ahead and do it.
Going off of this, what's the time period from when they got access to education and when you measure the outcome?
The time period between what, sorry?
When they got access to education and when you measured the wages.
Good point. So the data, the labor force survey data comes from the time frame, I think 2007 till 2016, right? So this would be pretty much 20 years, more than 20 years. So actually, we are talking about people who are old enough, senior enough. You're right. So
wouldn't there be possibility of shocks that would affect
this is a great point. This is a great point. I haven't thought about this. What I can do is to look at the history of employment, right? To check your first job, for example, when you enter the labor market and this kind of stuff. I hope actually I have this data in the labor force survey, and then we can do this. We can look at your first job, for example, when entering the labor market. Sorry? Perfect. Then I'm going to do this. Yeah, sure. This is your point, right? Yeah, perfect.
It's a well-established fact that education affects fertility. So why are you getting insignificant effects here? Why do you think this is the case?
No clue. I mean, mainly we have very few number of observations only because we limit this actually to women who are married and those who have children. So I'm not sure actually if we should believe this or not, but actually the coefficients are negative. The coefficients are negative. It's a matter of like just power. We don't have sufficient power to get this. So my hunch is like, if we have this multiplied by 10, then we would have a significant impact, hopefully, right? But it's just like we're not powered enough.
To combine together education and employment and see if it has an impact on fertility rate.
So fertility for those
who are educated and employed.
Yeah, sure. We can play around with this, but the problem is like, I'll end up having even fewer number of observations, which will not help much.
Sorry, I think came in late because of
No problem.
this time. I'm studying by this. How do you define social empowerment of women?
This one? Inter-household decision making, you mean?
Okay, inter-household?
Yes, inter-household decision making.
Decision making.
Yeah.
There are questions about
Yeah, exactly. So they ask people who's making the decision in each of the following situations, and we create an index out of this.
All right. I was just wondering if this will come later on, but do you think there is
any value since you have also measures of the economic empowerment component in terms of the wages. And I do know if you can do a wage, a blended male-female wage differential even within the household. But it would be interesting to see also interactions between economic and social empowerment. And you know, as Dina was saying, it's, you know, the value of social empowerment is really a value that might be affected by so many other intermediate values. So maybe some exploration of even, you know, correlations or you know, separate analysis.
Sure, we can play around with this. I mean, what I showed before is like the wage for the two genders separately, but we can combine this and see within the household actually if there's.
I've never seen something that looks. I think it's in the data, yes, you know, because you can actually
match the family,
yeah,
exactly, no, exactly. True.
I think it would be interesting to look at, you know, interactions, you know, how does education affect both economic and social empowerment? And, you know, sometimes the wage variable can result in unexpected results there.
True. Yeah, that's something actually we can try. Thanks a lot.
I'm sorry. The sample is in the NFS is very little, so
true.
You're focusing on those, for example, who are married.
Exactly.
And you're not focusing with the sample and just like putting the treated dummy for those who are born in this cohort.
The point is, like, you know, if we are interested in the intra-household decision making, there's no point including the non-married, right? So because I'm interested actually in the marriage relationship, if you are empowered enough or not. And this is the reason why we just focus on the married.
This is only women, right?
This is only women.
Yes. But why did it do that? It's not all the women who in the EMPS?
No, it's women who are the EMPS in this time frame, in a governed rate that has been treated. So I'm excluding Cairo, I'm excluding Alexandria. This is actually going in.
They are born in
43 till 64. 43 to 64, exactly. So like senior people, right?
I mean, like, why didn't you widen it a little bit? Like,
it would be very noisy, and it will include also some other education policies on the two sides, which I don't want to.
I mean, like the earlier group, so that you can have enough control group.
We can play around with the time frame. You're right, especially for the base.
That's why you're getting a very,
You're right. I mean, I was happy with this coefficient here, right? But for the fertility, we end up having. So I need to hurry up. For robustness checks, I don't have the time to show everything, but there's no evidence for migration in response to the policy. Also, we looked at the neighboring government rate. So if you construct a university in a neighboring government rate, would people react? No, there's nothing. Distance, we look at the impact of the distance, and most of the impact is coming from the short distance, only less than 10 kilometers. We use different levels of clustering. We use placebo date, so shifting things and playing around with that. There's a huge amount of literature right now on the two fixed effects of time and region, and there's a lot of literature actually dealing with this issue because it's sometimes introducing kind of negative weights. So we take care of this. It doesn't explain the thing. We include or exclude the never treated provinces, also pretty much the same. The thing that I would like to show you very quickly is other countries, because referring to this public employment thing, I was not sure actually if this pattern would exist in other countries as well. And guess what? It's pretty much the same picture, even in different countries like Brazil, Argentina, and India. Here, this is the probability of getting a university degree when the university is open in your province. And as you see, most of the impact, or almost all the impact, is coming for women and not men, right? India is pretty much similar to Egypt in terms of culture and social norms, etc. But Argentina and Brazil are different, and still this is the case. Yep, I still have time to show you something that's very preliminary, which is field of study. So when the university is constructed, when any university is constructed, it's rarely the case that they construct a university right away, like, you know, the whole buildings and all schools and departments, etc. So what happens, like, you know, they start with one or two departments, and then they expand the university later on, right? So we make use of this gradual construction of universities, of departments within the university, to study how different fields could have different outcomes. This is not finished yet. So this part of the paper is not there yet, but actually This is what we try to do, and I'm going to show you a table right now that gives you a flavor of what we can do with this exercise. So within the treated group, so say for example we have a university that has been constructed, we study the impact of being exposed to different fields, exploiting the variation in this field of study, right? So this table, for example, shows you the universities that we have in our sample, right, with the different fields of study. So for example, Aswan, first university starting date was 75, and these are the different fields. STEM is the science, technology, engineering, etc. Commerce is business. Medicine. Medicine here is combining both medical studies and nursing. Unfortunately, we cannot decompose those. Agriculture, teacher, education, and humanities, right? And as you can see, for example, for University of Aswan, for example, they started with both humanities and STEM. In Bahira, Alexandria University, what's now called the Manhoor University, because it was a branch of Alexandria University before, started with medicine, right, etc. Right? So we just make use of this to see if STEM has high returns, for example, compared to other fields or vice versa. And that's what we get. So this is pretty much regressing the treatment. If you are treated STEM, means like, you know, you are exposed to STEM education when the first university was constructed, versus humanities. So I'm comparing everything to humanities. This is the omitted group, right? So if you have a STEM university, you are more likely to go to STEM, right? If you have commerce or business, you are more likely to go there, right? And there's a bit of, I mean, differential effects across the different groups. Like, for example, here, I cannot explain this. STEM, for example, is less likely to work in public employment. It could be the case that they find employment and some other private sector stuff, right? But they are more likely to work longer hours. Medicine, keep in mind that we're talking about nurses plus doctors. You find here positive impact in terms of public employment and formal employment, right? But nothing else. Commerce, also something. So just like, you know, I don't want to put too much emphasis on this. Just gives you a flavor of what we can do or what we are planning to do with this data. If you have any questions here or any comments, please feel free to.
I guess it would be also interesting to look at the field of specialization as an organ, if it's arts or, and see whether we have an opportunity to go to STEM, for example, if there is a STEM department in a university or not.
I see. I'm not sure though if I have the data on the track in the LMPS?
Yes. And maybe also in the LFS.
I think what we have in the LFS is if you went to the vocational education versus, exactly, this is interesting. We can play around with this and see actually where this is coming from. You have a question? Okay. Okay, perfect. Conclusion, am I early? Okay. I can show you some other graphs. I have large appendix. So we found positive effect of university construction and university enrollment and finishing higher education, especially among women in Egypt. Long-term positive effect on labor market outcomes and marriage outcomes and social empowerment for women. And conditional higher education availability, fields of study seem to have different returns, right? What I can show you here is, so this, for example, the placebo regression 7 years earlier, you don't find a lot of things. Robustness checks, this would be like migration here. So nothing happens actually across the migration. So actually what I'm doing here is pretty much replacing the university finishing outcome variable with migration outcome variable, and you don't see much. Neighboring government rates, there is a bit of positive effect, but not that much, not that significant. Think, for example, about Ahliya and Gharbiya. So if you have Tanta University open before Mansoura University, for example, would people go there? I mean, keep in mind that we're talking about the 60s and 70s, so public transportation was not that easy. So it's still.
I know at least two governments, Tawiyata and Mansoura.
Yeah.
The LA. These were very interchangeable.
Exactly. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, I'm done. So if you have any questions.
I'm actually very interested in this paper, and if I want to look at the first part of it, which is the impact of education market outcomes in specific, I see policy implications coming out of it. So the decentralization of services provision at the different governorates, taking now, for example, of Hayat Karima and how they're taking jobs and having availing services in the governorate, and how this is having a positive impact on employment outcomes, and especially for females. The marriage is an additional interesting one, and if you actually can work specifically on the fertility rates part, this is going to add a very interesting additional dimension to it, because we always say education and female empowerment is one of the solutions that we could have to slow down population increases. So I think this second part, it just needs to have some additions in the model to make sure it is stronger and it's having this similar impact and this similar policy implications too.
True.
This work is extremely interesting. I think globally, the fact allocation of universities and how does it affect very important social and even political outcomes. So I mean, coming from the UK, and I was there during the Brexit, for example, the Brexit vote, and it was very clear that it was very highly linked to tolerance to immigrants, and the fear of immigration was the Syria exodus and to Germany and all that. A very clear empirical outcome that came out of the analysis of the Brexit votes when they looked at it in a decentralized way is all cities or places that had a university in them voted against Brexit, and the ones that did not have a university voted for Brexit. So I think there's a lot really, a lot to be said about the community impact of having a university, and maybe looking at the mechanism through which it changes, attitudes towards a position of women, etc. So I think, really taking this further and looking at intermediate variables and the interaction, I think would be very, very useful.
Sure. I think in Egypt we got this data on the first elections we got in 2012 after the revolution, right? So probably this is one of the things that can be played around here as an outcome variable. For example, if you're interested in the political dimension, and if having a university in your vicinity would affect people's voting behavior.
Looking at the differences between Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt,
True.
the urban areas, because you might be surprised. You might find the impact you might already have some results, I don't know. You might find the impact actually much more powerful in Upper Egypt, in the places where they don't have other ways of accessing global values.
Exactly. But keep in mind that Asyut University, and that this is something actually I didn't know before getting into this project, was one of the very early universities that was constructed in Egypt. So it was the third, I think, or the fourth probably after Cairo, Ain Shams, Alexandria, and then Asyut. So it was like the center of attention at one point.
But generally, they are much better in terms of education and
True, you're right. Exactly, yeah. But it's a great point.
It's not an example of like urban application.
So it's an exception. Yeah.
It's also percent of faculty who are women, for example, in some of those universities already. At that time, and whether the university is more like Kulliyat Banat, women only, universities, there are, of course, results at the secondary level that women only schools are associated with better outcomes for women. But it just, there's so much to be done. I mean,
True. I agree with you. Yeah.
Thinking, so, the more you let us know your paper, the better.
Sure.
Thank you.
Just like one explanation for why the effective fertility is not apparent in the results is that I would think like the fertility usually is sort of not really direct as like agent marriage, having a less conservative husband and so on. Like it's sort of like you get this first and then it takes time to decide about your and you see a change in the fertility.
Yeah.
Especially like when you think of like the fertility trends in Egypt over the period you're looking on.
Sure. Yeah.
That's why I'm telling you, try to take it widen it a little bit to the past.
Sure.
So maybe you could get some changes. Because it really takes some time, but much longer than and just like the decision making and so on.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, perfect. Jamal, you have a question?
Yes, Ahmed, did you consider also some heterogeneity in the effect among the treated groups? So for example, within the governorates that had earlier better high school systems or more investments in schooling, maybe these ones would be having higher treatment effects.
So I didn't want to show this, but now you're bringing. So actually, yes, there's a lot of selection.
Heterogeneous selection.
Exactly. Into like which governorates actually introduces this, so like the characteristics of people who were exposed to this to this university opportunity versus the others. But actually, my argument here is once you control for the governorate fixed effects, this disappears. Keep in mind, Jamal, that we are looking at within governorate policy, right? Like, so remember the event study that I showed you, like, this graph. So even within the same governorate where this policy was exposed, I'm comparing people who were lucky enough to get the chance and enroll at this university versus others who didn't have this chance, right? So there's selection at the university level, and probably there's selection by the decision maker choosing which location to build a university at before the other locations. But my argument is like, this shouldn't affect my identification strategy and what I'm doing here. But it's an excellent point. And actually, this graph shows you simply like, yes, there's selection, but once you control for the governorate fixed effects, the selection, at least on the observable characteristics, disappears, right? That's a great point. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all for joining us in this session.
Thank you so much.
Who joined us on Zoom and for those who joined us in person. Thank you very much. And it was a very interesting paper, very interesting discussion. So I'd like to thank you all for that.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thanks.
Okay. See you soon.